hello. This is John Huey with my co-host Michael Tingley,
Hello.
and we have a distinguished guest from Australia today, Mr. Mick Shields. How you doing, Mick?
Well, thank you, John and Michael.
And we are going to have a chat with our dear Australian friend, who is a atheist and a longtime person in recovery, and a person who is one of the originators and innovators of secular meetings in Australia. But Mick has a very interesting both personal story and an interesting set of insights about where he thinks this secular recovery movement may go, or generally may go in the end. So I will uncharacteristically try to step out of the way a little bit, and we'll let Mick tell us what he has to say today. Mick?
Yeah.
Thank you, John. I was born in 1947 to a middle class farming family in a rural area in the southern part of the country. Now, both of my parents were alcoholics, and that's always left me with a bit of a quandary over the years as to whether my alcoholism was in fact genetic or environmental. And I've really come to the realization over the years it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't matter at all. The reality is that I am in fact an alcoholic. I always have been, always will be. And I guess when I look back on it now, because of my family background, there wasn't a lot. I don't ever remember seeing my parents really show any affection to each other, nor really to us kids. And I think they tried to they replaced that with material things. They weren't fabulously wealthy, but they did have a quid, an Australian expression. So I always had the best bike and the best clothes and what have you of my peers. And I think when I look back on it now, had I been a child in a later era, I think I would have been diagnosed with a plethora of syndromes and an alphabet soup of acronyms. But in the parlance of the day, I was just a bloody spoiled brat and a prick of a kid. So that was it. Now, all of this changed quite dramatically, actually, at the age of 15. The age of 15, my mother died, and that's up till that point in time, I'd been a reasonable sort of a student. In fact, I'd been a very good student, an A student. But I just lost interest in everything. I would have preferred. I had an uncle, a bachelor uncle, my dad's brother, who had lived with us and really worked the farm because Dad's health and his alcoholism wouldn't allow him to do that. And my Uncle Dinny, he died actually 3 months before Mum. So the two stalwarts, if you like, in my life, and Dinny was sort of more of a father to me than my own father had been. And I had this vision, I think, when they died, that I could take over the farm. Now, I was 15, for Pete's sake. I was a big lad. I was physically capable of doing the work and had been doing the work during school holidays and what have you. But really, I'm sure when I think back at it now, I really had no idea. So and the family, the extended family decided that wasn't on, and they sent me away to a Catholic boarding school. Now, I had been at a Catholic school prior to this, but not a boarding school. And the Catholic boarding school was just beyond my perception. I hated the discipline, the religiosity, and the pedophilia. Now, I was never a target because at 6 foot tall, with a pretty defined sort of an attitude, I didn't present as much of a target, I suppose. But I hated the place and everybody in it. I absolutely detested them. Most of the students were the sons of rich city doctors and graziers and what have you, who families had just sent them away to these places to get them out of the way. And so I just took off at my first opportunity. And after about 3 of these jailbreaks, they just got sick of following me, sick of coming after me. This school was sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and they'd get in a car and they'd come and find me while I was trying to hitchhike out of it. About the third time, they gave up on this caper and just rang the old man and said, "Look, he's gone again. He should be home in a couple of days, and please don't send him back." Um, so that was what happened. So I got back to my father. He had no idea, absolutely no idea. Never had any idea of what he was going to do with a willful teenager. And I prevailed on him to run me into town, into the nearest town, from which I hitchhiked out and wound up in the Big Smoke in Melbourne, the capital of Victoria. Now, it wasn't too long before I bladed off relatives, and they soon got sick of me because I was lazy, I was defiant, I was just, as I said, a brick of a kid. Um, and the end result was that I wound up in cheap boarding houses and even sleeping rough. Um, and in a very short space of time, living a life of a person much older. As I said, I was big. I presented myself as older than my years. And I got by means of doing a bit of labouring work and a bit of petty crime. And at this time, my alcoholism manifested itself. And I started to drink. And when I look back on it now, right from the very start, there was never a time when, once having taken a drink, I could guarantee either my consumption or my behaviour. So access was access to grog was never a problem. As I say, I looked older than my years, and quite frankly, in the slums of Melbourne, if you had money, you were old enough anyway. So that was how that worked. I was fortunate to avoid any serious trouble with the police. My behaviour, often quite extreme, rarely involved consequences because I was answerable to nobody. Now, the next change probably in my life was at about the age of 19. I'd sort of reconciled with the old man, and we'd become sort of drinking mates more than anything else. And I'd hitchhike back up the bush and get on the grog with the old man for a few days, and then head back to Melbourne. Now, on one of these trips, I ran into the father of a girl I'd gone to school with, in a hotel, of course, because that's about it where the only place I ever went. And got chatting to him and sort of what's your daughter up to. Very quickly moved to me picking her up, and a relationship was formed. And I think we saw each other as an opportunity for love, which neither of us had found sort of in our family. Her family background was pretty ordinary as well. The result of which was within a year we were married. I was 19, she was 20. And I knew that this new reality required me to at least curtail my drinking. Like, I knew I was drinking too much. To my dismay, it was the first time I'd ever tried not to drink or even to cut back on my drinking, and I found that I couldn't. I had a job. I had a lot of good things going for me. Her family were fairly well to do. Her grandfather was a chairman of the local butter factory, and he got me a job there driving a milk tanker. And that was quite well paid and a skill that I developed. And I realised, a little bit before this, to backtrack just a moment, I'd become concerned about my father's drinking because Dad was in quite a bad way. And in the interest of research, I'd gone into the library, the public library, and I'd found this book called Alcoholics Anonymous. Obviously, the local group had donated it to the library. And I took it home, and I don't think I read it at all thoroughly, but I think I read enough of it to see that, gee, the old man could do with this. And I presented Dad with that scenario, which he rejected. He wasn't having a bar of that. And the result was that Dad died a couple of years later of this disease, age 62. But when I started to realise that it was, in fact, my drinking was an issue, I reached out to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I found an organisation which was the emphasis was on fellowship, not on program. I mean, I didn't know anything to compare it to at the time. But And I think it was really AA was a microcosm. Is that the word? Of the larger world, of the world at large. Um, Insofar as there were very few who were devout practicing Christians, and a lot who were church on for weddings and funerals type Christians, nominal Christians only, um, and most who didn't give a rat's ass. They were what I've heard referred to as apatheists. Were totally apathetic about the whole thing. Apatheists, I call them, and there were probably some non-believers, but it wasn't discussed. It just wasn't a big deal. It just wasn't a big deal, if I can put it that way. Now there was very little reading or whatever, because a lot of the guys in rural Victoria in the 1960s were barely literate, if at all, for people who couldn't read and write. So it was truly a fellowship, and I guess the mantra was we accepted we're powerless over alcohol. That was the first thing that was suggested to you and said, look, unless you can do this, you're not going to get anywhere, right? You've got to accept that you're powerless over alcohol, right? And it's the first drink, so you've got to stay away from the first drink. And then it suggested that one needed to abstain. One had to stop drinking, but not for the rest of your life. Do it for one day at a time. A day at a time, half a day at a time, an hour at a time, or however long it took you to get in touch with another member of the fellowship. And like there were no mobile phones in the 1960s, not even every house had a phone. So that involved a bit of effort sometimes. So abstain one day at a time, associate with other alcoholics. That was the fellowship. That meant going to meetings. Now, going to meetings in the bush was a bit different because each there was probably about, when I think back on it now, I reckon there was a meeting every night of the week within probably an hour's drive. So what would happen is that on a prescribed night, Monday, Tuesday, whatever, the local group, which might be one person, would open up the local church hall and hope that somebody would turn up to have a meeting. And more often than not, somebody did. And so we got in a car and we drove to these other meetings. So you had a meeting on the way to the meeting and a meeting on the way back. That was a fellowship. The other thing was to atone for past wrongs, to clean up the bloody trail of shit you left behind you, and to particularly with family. And the big thing was to help others by extending the hand of the fellowship to them. Now this worked, and it worked for 10 years. Between the ages of roughly 20 and 30. Now a fair few things happened during that 10 years. Not all of them good. That earlier marriage failed, unfortunately, after 4 children. We were just too bloody young. We were a couple of kids. We had no idea. I remarried in sobriety, and the woman I married, I'll be celebrating 49 years of marriage with her. Now, her story is almost worth a podcast on its own. Because she met me as a sober person. I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous when she met me, right? She had no history whatever of addiction or alcoholism or whatever in her family. She'd led what many would consider to be a sheltered life. So when I did drink, after about 7 years, I think it was, towards the end of that 10 years, this was an absolute shock to her. She found herself married to a man she'd never met. And why she didn't just pack up and leave is totally beyond me. And I actually had the cheek to say there a while back, well, you must have loved me because, you didn't leave. And she's a bit of a firecracker, my wife, a bit over 5 foot tall, red hair. And she assured me on no uncertain terms that the only reason she didn't leave me is because she had nowhere to go, which mirrors the stories of so many women. If she'd had a plan B, she'd have been gone. But today she assures me that she likes me. She even loves me. But that wasn't the case for many years of our marriage. Now, how did I drink again after 10 years? Well, I drank again after 10 years because I forgot I was an alcoholic. I got busy. I got a small business going. I was in transport most of my life. and I was successful. I was, again, happily married. And so I had a lot of stuff happening, you know. I had places to go, people to see, money to earn. And I just got too busy for those, for those meetings. I So that was it. I was also, and I don't know how much of my story this really was, but part of interstate truck driving, certainly in those days, was a fair reliance on amphetamines, and I was getting into them in a big way. And I think that, but I maintained a veneer. And that was important to me. I'd sort of learned from 10 years around AA, you know, what an alcoholic looked like or was supposed to look like. And I was very determined that wasn't going to be me. And I would have said to you, had you asked at the time, how the hell could I be an alcoholic when I'm with a big house, 2 cars and a boat in the driveway? All of them pretty highly geared, might I say, but that was how it was. So this went on till 1999. Now, in 1999, I was at my lowest ebb. The marriage was all but gone. She'd finally had a gutful. I had a business which was going down the tubes. Wasn't the first time that we'd had things not go well. Small businesses like that, but small business being run by an alcoholic is particularly vulnerable. And that's where I was. And this time, what was very different this time, I'd always in the past managed to keep the house separate from the business affairs and what have you. This time it wasn't, and we were in danger of losing the house. So this was the worst things had ever been. I had a moment of absolute clarity at 4 a.m. one morning that this could not go on. And it was that night that I walked back through the doors of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I have to say that I found a totally different culture. It had so little, it barely resembled the AA which I'd left all those years before. Leave or be gone was pretty much the mantra. You know, when I'd never struck this before, religion, as I say, was never a big thing in the 60s and 70s. Fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it. Just after you were told that this is a program of total and complete honesty. Get a sponsor and obey unquestionably everything you're told to do. What? I just couldn't. I realised at this time. I'd never had much truck with religiosity, with religion, largely because of my experience with the Catholic Church. But I realised at this stage that my philosophy really was atheism. I never could and never have found a scintilla of evidence, let alone proof of a deity. It's not a belief, it's a conclusion. Now, but I hung on desperately because I knew no other way. I practiced those tenets of the early years, and those were the things which really, I didn't even know at the time, those 6 tenets that I read out before, that I mentioned before, are really not dissimilar to what are quite often spoken of as the original 6 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which were used prior to Bill Wilson writing the 12 steps and writing the big book in 1938 or 39 or whatever it was. So I stayed sober. The days became weeks, became months, became years. After about 17 years, I think history was pretty much in danger of repeating itself, because I wasn't going to as many meetings. In fact, I was hardly going to any meetings because I just couldn't handle it. And John, if I may correct just a very small thing that you said there before, I didn't start secular AA. I wasn't even one of the originators of secular AA in Australia. There was secular AA in Australia from about 2014, I think, 2013, 2014. But it was at the other end of the country, and of course there was no Zoom, there was no, and even so there wasn't the communication that there is today. And I think I'd heard about it, but I didn't really know anything about it. But I did sort of become aware of this secularism in about 2017. And 2018, I came to North America, and I was at the I was at the 2018 secular convention in Toronto. It was a life-changing event for me. Now, I know that's a cliche, but it was a life-changing event for me. Coming from Australia, where I'd always felt somewhat marginalised, to find myself in a room with several hundred like-minded people was an absolute eye-opener. Now, I was still at this stage of the mind that somehow or other, I was pretty well brainwashed that secular AA, if there was to be such a thing, had to be sort of a part of AA. You couldn't go away and do things differently. Now, there was a bloke who spoke at that meeting, at that convention in 2018 by the name of John Huey. And I listened to him and thought, no, this bloke's crazy.
That's right, because I had the temerity to talk about the 12 steps as what they actually are, not what they say they are. Okay, which caused a little bit of consternation amongst even some of our secular friends.
Absolutely right. But this was a stage, the very first stage of my development, my journey, my evolvement, if you like, through secularism in AA. And so I came back to Australia and I teamed up with the late Helen M, who I'd met before, and Helen had tried to start an AA meeting in a secular meeting in Queensland once before. She'd actually had to invoke the experience of the Toronto intergroup people of a couple of years before in order to get her meeting up and going. But as a woman on her own, she had just been subjected to, well, bullying. There was no other word for it. The devout and deluded would turn up at her meeting and bully her, and she became concerned for her safety. So she'd close that meeting down. And shortly after that, I met her. I came back from Toronto, teamed up with Helen again, and we opened the Bulimba secular meeting, Bulimba Freethinkers secular meeting in February of 2019. And that meeting started out as a face-to-face meeting. There was no other sort of meeting in February of 2019. Helen had previous experience with the Sober She-Devils, which was an American women's group that was on Zoom. And I'd never heard of Zoom. I'm a refugee from the steam age. But we were started to get inquiries from people, mainly around Australia initially, who had heard of our meeting, but couldn't get to it, physically couldn't get to it. They lived, God knows where they lived, but nowhere where they could get to it. So it was Helen who came up with the idea, we'll do this Zoom thing. And we did. And we started a hybrid Zoom meeting. God, it was primitive when I look back on it now. But it was a hybrid Zoom meeting, and I believe it was probably the first, and I'm pretty sure it was the first in Australia. It doesn't matter. We weren't out to set records. We were out to contact alcoholic, And of course, that we were then well positioned when COVID came along, because we already had the infrastructure in place. And of course, when we had to close the face-to-face meeting, we then proceeded with the Zoom meeting, and that was all right. And I had people ringing me from all over Australia. Suddenly I'd become a ruddy guru. Good grief! How does this Zoom thing work? And I'd put them onto Helen, and she'd sort it out. So away we went. Now there's probably about 6 or 8 Zoom meetings, not only Zoom meetings, secular meetings in Australia that sprung out of that and are around today. Okay, in about 2020, it was 2020. There was a Australian convention here in Toowoomba in Queensland, a program to be on, and I had the idea that I would approach the organisers and see if we could get a secular meeting, and it was absolutely unheard of. Everybody said they'll never do that. They'll never do that. I was very lucky, actually, that I struck somebody on the organising committee who was open-minded and inclusive, and we did actually arrange to get that first meeting up. Unfortunately, COVID killed that convention. It wound up being an online event that I think 17 people turned up to. But nevertheless, its precedent had been set, and there has been a secular meeting at every Australian convention since. I've sort of been involved in organising that. Now, but the problem has always been that I became aware as time went by that what I had naively seen to be acceptance and inclusiveness really wasn't that. It was a reluctant tolerance. That was all we were getting. Secular AA is always treated as some subservient vassal, forced to go cap in hand to its masters for any scrap of recognition. Many in AA would see a non-believer alcoholic die in the gutter rather than welcome him without making demands that he adopt rather than welcome him and demands that he adopt their belief structure. Now, so I went from my position always was, and John and I had a lot of discussions about this. I supported the concept of small s secular as an adjective. I'm a secular person who belongs to a secular group of Alcoholics Anonymous, rather than the title of I am a member of secular AA. So what changed? I've always avoided the politics of AA. The upside-down consensus-based system has always made no sense to me, and always felt it was open to manipulation. My life experience of volunteer organisations is there are two kinds of people who get involved in these. And I don't care whether it's Apex or whatever sort of organisation it is. There are two types. One is that person who is genuinely interested and philanthropic and wants the best for people. The other is the one who has never probably achieved a great deal in their life and just wants to be able to exert some power over people. And my limited experience with area meetings as AA has suggested to me that the second type pretty much held the reins, and more recent experience has proven that. A couple of years ago, I created some black and white flyers just for distribution to any meetings that would sort of let me put them on their literature table and what have you. Some would throw you out. Some would you'd leave them there and they'd throw them in the bin, etc., etc. But anyway, it was something to have a go at. And a very good friend of mine, a member of AA, had an artistic flair. She got hold of them and got hold of this idea and prettied it up and made it into colour and what have you. Eventually, was turned into a trifold because that sort of fitted with in the literature folders in the groups. And then somebody had the idea, why don't we try and get this conference approved? Now this was where the poo really hit the fan. I was sort of in favour, but I really thought we were tilting at windmills. There was an area meeting. This was proposed to, and it's a long and horrifically long and tenuous process. But it went to conference. It then had to go back through all through the areas to be voted upon, etc., etc. I went to the local area meeting, thinking that I was to be I could be there as a co-author of this thing to answer any questions. What I found myself in was the middle of an absolute slanging match, where I was called upon to defend the very existence of secular AA or secularism in AA. It's not AA. It's not in the big book. Go and start your own organisation. And that was, if you don't like it, piss off. Also, too, it needs to be said that most of this was actually quotations from Bill Wilson, from Bill Wilson's later years.
So what was the gist of your pamphlet?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, the gist of the pamphlet was that mainly quotations from Bill Wilson from about 1945 right through to when he died, really, when Bill was walking back his earlier religiosity. I've always believed that that Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't the first. There were the Washingtonians and quite a few organisations over the centuries, which had been, some of them relatively successful. In some were religious, some weren't. What AA had that the others didn't have, really, I think, was Bill Wilson, the master salesman. As I say, now whether he's walking it back was actually he's reading the room, whether it was the salesman re-identifying his market if you like, or whether it was in fact a genuine change of heart. I don't think anybody knows. But the fact remains that there are so many scrapes of bills, and that's what we put in. That's what we put in this pamphlet.
Yeah, yes, but Mick, I don't want to take issue, all right? But in just about every quote that they extract of Bill Wilson's that's supposedly inclusive, somewhere in the context of the entire document, Wilson says something to the effect that these non believers may find the way of light in the end. And also, he generally comes up with something about how God's grace will see us through all of this, which goes to the heart of the phrase that popped into my mind in my estrangement, which was passive aggression. He was a master of that, Nick. Was he not?
Absolutely, and as I said, he was a master salesman. He was a master salesman. So I guess he was trying to walk two sides of the fence. I really don't know, but I saw it as an opportunity to present at least a part of what he'd said. And the thing did get to conference, and it was rejected. It was altered. It was moved around. The wording was changed, etc., until eventually they agreed that yes, this could go ahead. And then at the very last minute, one of the heads of AA exercised his power of veto. So yes, I lost all faith in the process, and I also realised that traditional AA really is not any suggestion of inclusion or whatever. Really is nothing more than. And I think really they're still harking back. I think that the spectre of Toronto back in those years ago still haunts them a bit. So they're a little bit dubious about just how far they can push themselves. Some thoughts of evolution of AA. AA came to Australia in 1945. Even then, I believe the culture of my country was more secular than the US. We're pretty irreverent in Australia. And the Lord's Prayer was never accepted. The Lord's Prayer has never been used to either start or finish a meeting in Australia. And I reckon I can still hear the echo of "piss off, mate, we're not doing that" from some bushy. Now, what I do know from my experience in Australia in the 60s and 70s was very short on God and long on action and fellowship. The period between my leaving in 77 and returning in 99 is devoid of any lived experience on my part. But something certainly happened. Something certainly happened between those periods. The AA of 99 had become very cult-like, and despite growing secularisation in the wider community and the growing refusal of AA to engage with AA, it continues on that trajectory. I'm wondering whether some of the fact that we do have there's much easier communication. I mean, I am sitting in my home in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm talking with you guys and going out to a larger audience sort of all over the world. That certainly wasn't easily possible. Back in the 60s and 70s, by the late 90s, it was becoming a bit more so. So did the religiosity of some of the United States permeate into Australia? I'm really not sure. The concept, there's nothing new in AA. The concept of AA, of drunks getting together to combat their alcoholism, was going on long before 1935. Very little, if any, of the big book is original. And it's said that Richard Peabody's The Common Sense of Drinking had a prominent place on Bill's bookshop. I'm not suggesting that he plagiarised the whole thing, but not very little of it is original.
The steps were lifted from the Oxford group in great part. So the Oxford group practice of the absolutes. They took the word absolutes out. But if you look at the history of the Oxford Group, it's very clear where much of those 12 steps came from. So it's not, of course, it's not original, but it is dogmatic, right? In the end. And their passive aggression can turn into aggression, as I think you saw down there in Australia, right, Mick? The passive aggression got downright aggressive, right?
Well,
Very much so. Very much so. The mask and the gloves soon come off when they're directly challenged. And one of my problems is that I find that secular AA in Australia still, most of the members, and I say most, I'm a bit scared of generalising here, are still sort of happy enough with this cap in hand, crumbs from the table approach. I'm not. And this has led me to, I've often been heard to say that I believe that AA is in its dying years, and AA's own figures, own statistics would reflect that. You look at the supposed numbers of about 1992, and it plateaued about then, and it's been going down ever since. Now, and that's just the bare figures. If you correlate that with the growth in populations in the States, in Australia, worldwide, where one would expect to see an increase, that sort of multiplies the effect. And AA in my observation is less and less accepted in the medical field. It's less and less accepted in the rehabilitation field. It is seen by many, most probably, to be a religious organisation, if not a cult. People, and for that reason, I can see it dying off. Now, I believe that there is an opportunity there for secular AA or secularism in AA. I don't know about the term secular AA.
Why don't we just take those initials out?
Yeah.
What about eliminating those initials? We're not, when we invited you on, we know the history of your struggles down there, and obviously you're going to talk about that organization. But what we tend to do here in general, right, Michael, is to sort of come up with strategies and methods and ideas about how we cope with life without any of that stuff, or without any reference to
I
it.
was going to say, Mick, it's relatively recent that you have turned your back on that program, and part of that was your difficulty trying to get traditional AA in Australia to accept secular AA. That was the point of your pamphlet, right? To try to get them to accept secular AA as like a branch of AA. But since that experience, and in my case, since the COVID pandemic, and finding discovering these Zoom meetings, these Zoom secular recovery meetings, I see turning completely away from it, like John has. I mean, it's no longer relevant because we have discovered something else that works,
Right.
and something that is simple, and something that is kind of a reaction to all of the complexity of traditional AA, how AA has evolved, like you say, from the 60s to now. So our reaction to that change is to keep it simple and do just this, these Zoom meetings where we show up and we share our experience with each other. If we we maintain our abstinence, and we maintain this community of abstinence, this community of helping each other. That simplicity of that is, I think, our reaction to making the attempt. When I first found AA Agnostica, it was such a breath of fresh air, because I had been in traditional AA for so long, and then all of a sudden finding AA Agnostica. But I saw it as a retreat from AA in general, as opposed to the way it is now. Even that has evolved to being that that branch of AA, secular AA being a branch of traditional AA, which maintains way too much of the traditions of AA. So anyway, I think that getting back to what's working for us and for a lot of people is this, the simplicity of doing this. And it was a long way to learn that. I mean, you went through a lot of shit in Australia. John and I have been up against the wall so many times with so many things here in the States that, yeah, it was not easy to get to this place, but I'm very happy that we have found our way to this place that we are right now.
Right. And it's the fellowship part and the abstinence part that will see you through.
Yeah.
That's what's seen me through my 38 years and Michael's nearly 20 years. And you're, what is it? How many? 25 years at least right now,
26 years on Monday.
26 years. Yeah.
26 years on Monday.
On Monday.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Great. And, and it's, I believe it was, fellowship and abstinence that are pretty much at the core of what this is about. But the thing about us is, and you found that out in your own story as you articulately spoke about how you got absorbed with other things, gave up the fellowship part, and then eventually the abstinence part went. Okay. And that's what we're trying to, we're not establishing a program, an alternate fellowship. There are other places you can go out there for that. There's Buddhist stuff, and there's places you can go that's so-called science-based, where they have, lists of analytical principles that they adhere to and go through. But we're not at all there. We're so reductive. We're all about having a conversation and talking about how we're dealing with our issues day to day. I mean, we'll be talking about, I think our next episode will probably be about, behaviors other than alcohol and drugs that are problematic for people in recovery. We want to go to other issues that maybe are causing difficulties in people's lives today, or enhancing the alternative activities and the alternative thoughts and the alternative behaviors that are enhancing people's lives today. And that's, the trouble we have here now in the United States and the pressure we're under, and we're not going to talk about that today, but hopefully, but it's more important than ever to stick together, right? And you can stick together without being part of some so-called fellowship that is inherently hostile to you.
Yeah, I like the fact that you mentioned that you're not a member of this, and I like that. Yeah, we're not members. It'd be like saying I'm a member of the atheist church. No,
it's just a voluntary association. What?
Last night I made the announcement at the local meeting, the meeting that I founded 6 years ago, that I will no longer be attending that meeting. And I made it, and I spoke to, because there's quite a few people there that I knew, a lot of people online, not so much in the face-to-face thing, but a lot of people there that I know and I've got to know quite well over the years, and I didn't want to just disappear off their screens. So I made a point last night of saying goodbye to these people, because I have made the decision that I am no longer willing to associate with AA in any form. There's those letters again, in any form. And I've taken a step further, in that I've been attending for a while now. I've been attending your afternoon with the atheists on a Sunday, John, and your Terra Hout meeting, Michael.
Yes,
Trying to find, because I know that I'm still an alcoholic and I still need fellowship. So I'll be looking now. Your afternoon with the atheists is actually at 5 a.m. on a Monday morning for me, and that's not a particularly user-friendly time. So what I've done is that I've actually started another meeting, which will start tomorrow. And it's at 10 a.m. Australian time, 7 p.m. Eastern American time. And it is an unaffiliated meeting. It is an unaffiliated meeting. No, I've simply said it. I've stated that it's no religion, no dogma, no bullshit. And I'm not too sure what actual shape it's going to take. I'll let it take its own shape. And see where we go from there. But it will give me a commitment, which I need. It will give me the opportunity to meet with my fellows. Now, as recently as 12 months ago, I would not even have considered the possibility of me doing that. But that's where I am at the moment. And yeah, I agree entirely. And you blokes have seen me go through my development, if you like, to where I am today. And I'm sad in a way because I made a lot of friends, and some of those people I will still stay in touch with on an informal basis. But I've made a lot of friends in so-called secular AA, but I just can't do it anymore. So that's sort of where I am today, and it's been, and I've looked to you guys in the States for a while now to sort of give me a lead, and because what you've been doing is there has been nothing like that in Australia.
Right. Well, we're a minority inside of a minority. Talk about special interest efforts. But we get enough positive feedback from enough people telling us that we're of some assistance. So I guess we're going to continue doing the little bits we can while we're still on this mortal coil.
Oh yeah, and speaking of eliminating those two letters, I'm proud to say that I finally took those two letters off of my Monday night Terre Haute Free Thinkers meeting.
Super.
I've been putting that off and debating it, and finally it is totally unaffiliated and free range. It's a free range meeting, and organic.
Who knows where this is going to go? I mean, I was astonished how conservative the so-called Secular International Convention, the successor to the meeting that Mick went to back in 2018. We had a couple years where COVID knocked the international gatherings out of the box. But I was down there presenting along with our colleague John C. and Vic Losick, and I had my own session, and they had an afternoon with the atheist session of their own that John put in down there. But we were there were just very few pure atheist voices even there. Everything else was some sort of, at least to me, it was some sort of mishmash or accommodation or some sort of, prescription for healthy living or some sort of, it was like a conflict resolution seminar of some sort. I mean, it was, I couldn't go to a lot of the sessions. There were some very good sessions that I did go to, but there were a lot of them, particularly the main sessions in Orlando. I just couldn't go to. I still can't figure out what emotional sobriety is. I think Michael's having trouble figuring it out too. I don't know about you, Mick. Maybe you're emotionally sober, but I don't know what the fuck it all sounds like somebody telling you what to do, doesn't it? Are you more emotionally sober than me, Mick? You probably are.
No, I very much doubt it, John.
I know Michael is. I'm positive Michael is a leavening influence. He keeps us on the straight and narrow here at the Sober Atheist Podcast. Without him, this thing wouldn't work at all. So, it's just like, where do we go from here, Mick? Where do you think this thing goes? You've been around a long time. What do you think?
Well, what do I think? I think, as I said before, I think that the mother organisation has a finite period left. I just can't see how it can continue
No,
to
not
go.
them. I'm not talking about them. They're dead. They're dead and
Okay,
gone.
right.
Okay, they're dead. They're dead to me, just like
Okay,
every
right. All right.
Republican is
Okay, I'll
dead.
answer your question.
Okay,
I
they're as dead to me as the Republicans are. Okay, so
I
yeah,
think the way forward probably is not even trying to form some giant overarching organisation. I think it's a case of you do what you do, which is run your afternoon with the atheists on a Sunday. I'll do what I do, which is run my and it's going to be called Abstinent Atheists Australia. Um, yeah, I know it's got a lot of A's in there, but still, it's.
no,
And
that's all right. You're
But then
forgiven.
maybe not.
We gave you a
but yeah,
dispensation.
so now whether that'll grow, okay, what's that going to achieve? I'll tell you what it's going to achieve. It's going to keep me sober, right? That's what it's going to do. It's going
Well,
to keep me sober. Now, there might be some other people who come along and it helps them get sober too. Now, whether the idea, I'm not interested in forming some sort of an association, whether that idea takes root or not, I really don't know. I really don't know. But yeah, I'm not sure what the future brings. I mean, and I'm like you, John. I mean, my future is somewhat finite. Um,
right,
so
somewhat,
so there's a shitload of food. There's
somewhat. You
a
know,
lot of future out there that I won't be a part of.
we may all be dead of stress here in the U.S. by the end of the year. So who knows? So yeah, it's like you do the little bits you can, and when you get a message out of the blue, like Michael and I do from time to time, we get a message out of the blue from someone we don't know, who doesn't know us personally, who's only encountered us on this little platform or some other speaking or whatever we've done, and they tell us that we help them deal with otherwise difficult or sometimes insoluble issues for them.
Yeah.
And if it's one person, that's enough, okay? And if it's two people or three people or five people, that's even better. But, as far as, world shattering developments in the world of recovery, I'm afraid those developments are going to have to come at some other place in some other time.
Somebody else's book.
Yeah, maybe in the future we'll just be seen as a footnote of people that did their best to try to help others on the road, going down the road, doing the best they could do. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There are organisations out there that aren't doing a bad job.
No, there are other people that do stuff. There's all kinds of ways. There's some people that swear that these new medication regimes help them. I even hear other people who I totally disagree with that harm reduction works. But who am I to say that harm reduction doesn't work if somebody comes up to me and says harm reduction does work for them? I can't, even though I vehemently disagree with programs for addicts and alcoholics that are not abstinence based, there is testimony from some people that they are helped. So I've got to be I'm never agnostic about anything, but I've got to be sort of agnostic about those things. Because if somebody reports that they're helped, I guess I have to say that they're helped, right? Even if I disagree with the premise.
Yeah, and there are just so many variables involved with so many different people. Yeah.
Right.
There's a young woman here in Queensland, been sober about 15 years or something, I think, and she's gone out and she has qualifications. She's university educated, etc. As a counsellor and whatever else. And she set up a clinic here in Queensland, in Brisbane. And it's a pay for service thing. There's no doubt about that, because she's going to make a living. That's what it is, And I don't have an issue with that at all. A lot of people in AA do have an issue with that, but that's their bloody problem. And I have to tell you that she is having a success rate, and it's total abstinence. It's a little bit of AA in there, but not much in the program side of it. And let me tell you, she's having a success rate that AA would bloody kill for. So yeah, there are yeah, and that's working for her. I've had a little bit to do with it. She used to work. She used to be in the office for AA.
Yeah, well,
And it's
at
working.
at the end of the road, Nick, the only thing we have to validate is our own experience. And
Yep.
I can absolutely assure you that my program of recovery and abstinence has worked 100% of the time for over 38 years. But that's all I know. I don't know anything about how Mick's thing works or Michael's things with the ins and outs. I suspect I have indications that it's abstinence at the root of it, and perhaps getting some fellowship and help from others in there too, and then helping others in there somewhere too. But shit, the only person I could be certain of is me. And these days, with the insanity going on here, I'm wondering if I can even be sure about that. I think I need to get some sleep this weekend. So, we're
Also, we have to give ourselves credit for knowing what doesn't work.
right. Right. Well, a lot of that shit I heard down in Orlando at that last convention didn't work for me. That I know. And I'm positive that awful book you were talking about earlier, the name of which we are not going to repeat, by the way, this not being a democracy here, and I'm not going to repeat the name of that fucking book, it just definitely doesn't work for me. And we are coming. I've got the timer here. We can look at the bottom of our screens, and we've got the timer running, and we're getting to the point where we got to come to some sort of conclusion. Which I guess the only conclusion is we're very pleased to have had you as a guest, my friend.
Yeah,
That's
you've got a
wonderful.
great story, Mick, and I think it'll inspire a lot of people. It'll inspire a lot of people to just be honest too about what's going on and how they feel about their recovery.
Right. And we don't want to be an echo chamber here. We want to get other perspectives and other voices. And we've even had voices on here that don't agree with us much at all. Right, Michael? We've had that.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
had
We
that
had
experience before too.
someone who had their own alternative AA
Well,
program.
whatever. But we're struggling along as best we can. But we always, even though we're a little down at the mouth these days, all right, and we still sort of believe that there's somewhere out there. And this is Michael's great contribution to our aggregation. That always out there, there's a kernel of what, Michael? What is there? A
Kernel of hope, and you have added to that kernel.
And we
Mick,
always
I appreciate
agree
it.
that we proceed in the end in an attitude as best we can of peace and love.
Yeah,
Peace and love, right?
peace and love.
Absolutely.
That's what we're going to leave you with here today, because we've come to the end of our wonderful hour together. Whatever time it is, wherever the hell you are, Mick, it's some kind of hour there and day, or I'm just totally confused.
It's the next day.
But there you go. We love you dearly, and we love all of our fellow listeners to the best of our ability. Peace and love, right, Michael?
Peace and love.
Okay.
Peace and love.
And we wish you all a fond adieu for now, but not goodbye.
Thank you, gentlemen.